Hi, everyone. Welcome to Tech Tuesday. My name is Tom Levine. I'm Cornerstone's technical specialist, and I'm here to help you make the most of your Office programs. Today, we're going to be going into part 2 of our Excel series. So if you haven't seen part 1, I'd recommend going back and taking a look. Just a few things to note, though, before we get started. First, we do have some attachments available to you on your screen. You should see them sort of around this dialog box that I'm displaying now. Those include the Excel files for what we're operating off of now for the sample. So if you'd like to follow along, the edited example is the spreadsheet we're going to be working off of today, just continuing off of session 1. The unedited version is the one if you want to start from square one and rewatch our first webinar, you can go ahead and use that as your reference sheet to go through and follow from there. I believe that should be all the attachments. So without further ado with that, housekeeping. If you have any questions, I will be monitoring the chat, so please feel free to type it in there or in our questions box. I'll be answering questions at the end of the presentation, but I'll also be available here if you have something pressing that you'd like to ask about Excel. Excel is kind of a tricky thing to learn, so if you do have a question related to anything that I'm doing, I'd recommend you ask it in the moment. It's just a little easier to reply. Also, if you do have a question, but you don't feel comfortable sharing it in this kind of a setting, or if maybe it's a little more directed to something you're trying to do specifically, please feel free to give me a call at 513-487-5390, or by sending me an email at tlevine@crnstone.com. I'd only ask that you include Tech Tuesday in your subject line if you're emailing me, because I do separate out my emails by subject line. And you don't have to copy this down. I'll be showing it at the end of the presentation as well. Also, don't forget about our autopilot program. It's our updated agency services program, and as a Cornerstone broker, you have access to a myriad of services that can help you with your business outside of your scope and planning for the future. The agency services program is designed to help you make a plan for your business, your clients, and your family, no matter the situation. That's part of what autopilot does. Among these services provided are the Parachute Succession Plan, the Flight Plan Retirement Assistance, and co-pilot service agreements. As one of these brokers, you're the pilot of your business, and we're just your flight crew. We're here to take care and create a customized plan for your business based on your needs. If this seems interesting to you, please become a part of our agency services program by going to www.crnstone.com/agency-services-program. That is displayed on your screen right next to the Become an ASP Broker section. I'd highly recommend giving it a try. Also, don't forget about our new partnership with EB3. EB3 creates fully customizable benefit booklets with you in mind. It's designed specifically for employee benefits brokers. It's got a low monthly pricing plan, customizable color schemes. You're able to add your own PDF documents in and wrap documents and SPDs, even more. The best part is that we are lucky enough to be part of an exclusive distribution partner agreement for Ohio and Kentucky, which means as a Cornerstone broker, you would have priority access. I'm going to put the link here in the chat. It's www.crnstone.com /EB3 if you're interested in signing up and getting access to these benefits. Also, don't forget our marketing consultation program. This is sort of another benefit to marketing that we have here. It's a full marketing consultation program where our in-house marketing expert, Jess Larkin, will take a closer look at your existing marketing strategies and resources to help you establish realistic and measurable goals and objectives for your brand. She'll also help you create a step-by-step plan to help maximize your brand and take it to the next level. Some of the services offered are brand audits, social media management, print marketing and email marketing, onboarding kits, and much, much more. All of the brokers participating in this program will receive a free brand evaluation workbook. Just contact Jess Larkin for more. I will say our services are in high demand, and it's first come, first served. So if you want to give it a shot, I'd recommend reaching out to her now at jlarkin@crnstone.com. So without further ado, how do we take Excel to the next level? Like I mentioned before, Excel is kind of a weird program to kind of wrap your head around, especially if you're not familiar with programming at all. We're looking at our reference file here right now, and this is just the file that we've been working off of since our previous Tech Tuesday. As you can see over here in our working file, this is sort of where we left off. We covered a few different text functions as well as two programs, or two functions rather, that I'd like to revisit before we get moving. This is actually pretty important. The first is a concatenate function, and the second is a Vlookup. And this time, instead of just showing you what the programs do, I'm going to dissect them a little bit more and show you why they're doing these things. The first program we looked at was concatenate. And what concatenate does is it combines strings of text. We do have one other question, however, from John Harris. How do I get audio? If anyone else is having problems with audio, please type it in the chat. I'm going to type it here. Yeah, so if anyone else has any volume issues, please let me know. Anyway, I'm going to assume that everyone else is able to hear me. So without further ado, I will continue. Concatenate is a really useful function. And what it does is it combines two strings of text. If you look at this formula right here, really what we're looking at is what the colors align to, as well as the commas that are being used here. Concatenate is just a text function. Like I said, it combines two pieces of text. In this instance, and I'm going to hit enter just to show you the result here, it combines the last name Adam and the first name John into the combined, first structured name Adams, comma, space, John. The reason it's doing that is because of this part of the formula. This would be the guts of the concatenate function. B2 references cell B2, which is surrounded in blue, hence why the color of this part of the function is blue. This indicates that it's referencing this cell. This is similar to C2 over here on the right-hand side of our function. C2 is red, and it references cell in column C, line 2, giving us C2 as the reference. I'm just going to retype that. And as you can see, it surrounds that cell, C2, right over here. I'm going to go ahead and use our pen function just to make it a little more clear. This part, C2, references the cell in column C, row 2, meaning the name John. And after I go ahead and erase the drawings, I'm going to show you how this can be changed a little bit. So the other part of the function right in here is just adding a comma. If you're trying to mess with text in a formula, you always have to surround what you're trying to type in these quotation marks. The quotation marks here tell Excel that I'm not trying to add a comma into this formula. All I'm trying to do is display what's within this quotation mark as text. And that's what's adding the comma space. So let's go ahead and run through the concatenate function through the formula bar. And what I mean by that is the wizard. I'm going to go under the home screen and click on the drop down for AutoSum, then click More Functions. This brings you to the wizard that we brought up in our last webinar. And what this does is it sort of walks you through how a function works. I'm going to type concatenate into my search function window and hit go. When I hit go, it brings up anything that references concatenate, and it gives me a description under here about what the formula does. Concat does the same thing as concatenate. It just does it a little differently. There's COUNTIF, which arranges the number of cells within a range to meet a given condition. That one's a little more advanced. Or text join, which concatenates, which is why we got this function, a list or range of text using a delimiter. Delimiters are just things that it can exempt, basically. So we're going to choose the concatenate function by double-clicking it. You could also click on it and hit go or OK at the bottom of that wizard. This brings up the concatenate function arguments. This is what was displayed separated by the commas in our function bar up here. The function bar is what I've sort of arranged this window right underneath. And what that does is it displays the actual text of the function that you're using. In this instance, we just have a blank concatenate function set up. I'm going to click on text box 1 and click on the little up arrow right here. This allows me to edit the function arguments. And the arguments are what I pointed out before, what was highlighted in blue and red. These are just cells that you're referencing. In this case, I want the last name Adams to be the first argument in my concatenate function. The next text box, text 2, is going to be where we input that comma space. Like I said, if we want Excel to take something as text, we have to surround it in quotation marks. So I'm going to type quotation, comma, space, quotation. Now, instead of just clicking and typing that, I could also have clicked on this little up box and typed quotation, comma, space, quotation, and then clicked the box again. And that would do the exact same thing. Our last argument for this box is going to be cell C2, as it was before. And I'll do that just by clicking on that little up arrow next to the wizard and clicking cell C2. Then I'm going to hit the down arrow and hit OK. And now I have my concatenated name. This is the exact same formula that we had before, done completely by walking through the wizard. Now, what I'm going to show you is kind of part 2 to that explanation now. Part 2 is more what I would aim for in common Excel use, which is just typing things into the address bar. And the reason I recommend this is because it'll give you a much better knowledge of how functions work in Excel. Now, if you're just thinking you're going to use Excel to make tables and charts and just display data, I know this probably doesn't seem very useful to you, but it's a little deceptive, and it actually is very useful. The reason this sort of thing is useful is because when combined with other functions, it can really be a lifesaver. For instance, let's say you're dealing with a string of policies, and you're trying to pull out explicitly what makes one policy different from another. You could combine a first name, like the first 3 letters of a name, and the last 3 digits of a policy number. And that would give you a unique identifier that you could then use a Vlookup to find. We're going to be going over that example in a moment, but it's very useful in manipulating data. And a lot of this stuff can be combined together, which is sort of what I'm going to try to show you, or at least display to you here with this webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and type this formula now instead of using the wizard and just sort of explain what parts do what. Part of why I'm doing this with the concatenate function is because it's one of the more simple functions that Excel has as well. These things can get rather unwieldy as you go on, so it's important to have a good grasp of the basics of what these formulas do. If I type concatenate, click on cell B2 or type B2, then add my quotation, comma, space quotation, then add C3 and hit enter, or C2, my bad. Then it will combine the names the exact same way. And all I did was type that in. I didn't use a wizard. The way that I did that was first by hitting equals. When you type equals into a cell, it tells Excel that it's either about to do some math or that it's about to use a formula. So you have to put equals at the very front of any formula you use by typing. Then you have the name of the formula, in this case concatenate. As you're typing this in, it'll actually show you the little function right here that you're typing. In this instance, it says concatenate, and it'll give you another little text pop-up that I'm not sure you can see unless you're following along on your screen. This text pop-up says join several text strings into one text string. And if the techno jargon is a little jarring, string just means a list of values. In this case, this list of values is a list of letters, being ADAMS in cell B2 for Adams, and JOHN for John in the first name column. That'd be cell C2. Once you hit the opening parenthesis, it gives you the arguments of the function. If you click on one of the arguments in blue, it registers as a hyperlink, but it likely won't activate until you're done typing the function. Typically, it's a little more explanatory than text 1, text 2, but for concatenate, that's all it really says. In Vlookup, it will tell you the arguments of the function, which mean all of the inputs, or all of the things that you're trying to get it to combine, or what you're trying to get the formula to look at, basically. Those are a lot of different ways to look at it. And I'm trying to hit all of my dots here, so my apologies if it's a little unclear. In this case, our first argument is cell B2. And I'm going to type that in as B2, just like that. Then I'm going to add my text as I've explained, and then C2. And I have my function. As you could see when I typed, it just kept extending the text arguments here. That's because concatenate doesn't have a definitive end. It can combine as many different cells as you want into one text string. Now, before I go ahead and explain VLOOKUP, I want to explain something called syntax. Syntax is a programming term, and it's part of techno jargon. But basically what it means is the structure of your formula. It's the same sort of thing as syntax in English. It's where you would add a comma when you naturally pause when you talk, or how you would punctuate your sentence. And it's extremely important in use of these types of formulas. In this case, the syntax or structure of the formula is equals, formula name, input, comma, input, comma, input, or argument, comma, argument, comma, argument. The comma here is the syntax of the formula. It's how it distinguishes arguments. But you can do a little bit more with that as well. If I were to drag this formula over some number of cells, I want you to look at this formula bar that I have highlighted as I move my cursor. If I move over one, it now references, instead of cells B2 and C2, cells C2 and D2, which is 2 over. Then D2 and E2. Then F2 and G2, or E2 and F2, and so on and so forth. And if I just extend cell H, as you can see, it's referencing all of the previous names as it moves forward. This is something you have to be aware of when you're extending functions in Excel down different ranges. For instance, if I just drag this down, which is what I had done before, it changes the references to B3 and C3, B4 and C4, B5 and C5, as I extend it down from rows 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and so on and so forth. The reason this is changing is because I haven't locked any cell references. What that means is that Excel views this B2 as relative. And by relative, I mean relative to where the formula was input. So instead of seeing actually cell B2 and C2, what this function thinks I'm saying is first reference the cell 2 to the left, then insert our comma text, then reference the cell 1 to the left. If I extend this down this direction, the new cell 1 to the left and 2 to the left become B3 and C3, then B4 and C4, and so on and so forth. If I extend this to the right, it becomes C2 and D2, D2 and E2, E2 and F2, and so on and so forth as well. And the reason for this is, like I said, because this formula is relative. The way to change this is by inserting $ into your equations. What $ do is they lock different values of a cell. And the way I'm going to display this is by putting a $ on the B part of this argument for B2, and the 2 part of the argument for the second part, which is C2. And we're just going to see what happens as I drag this formula around again. I'm going to drag it out just as far on the column and on the rows. And we're going to see what happened. If I go further to the right, remember previously it was changing its reference in lockstep. So as I scrolled over from D to E, for example, it instead from referencing B2 and C2 went to referencing C2 and D2. But if I scroll over one now, as you can see, if I click on the formula, it's still referencing cell B2, but it is no longer referencing cell C2. It's now referencing cell D2. If I move over one more, it's still referencing cell B2, but it is now referencing cell E2 instead of D2. So by putting the $ in front of the B, we have stopped the formula from moving over as the row is changed. Similarly, if we look down, we see the number for column B keeps changing as we go down, but not for column C. We keep getting that John as the export for the second argument of our function. And the reason for that was that the $ right here was put just in front of the 2. Now, concatenate is a function where it doesn't matter as much typically. If you're extending the formula down, then you're normally okay with leaving out $. But for something like a Vlookup, that matters. And I'm just going to undo a lot of my changes here. And I'm just doing that by hitting Control-Z until we get back to square one, where we were. The reason $ matter is for our Vlookup formula. This is what I referenced in our last webinar to find the relationship section here. And we're going to do another Vlookup here in just a moment. As you can see, cell A2 is a unlocked reference, which means it doesn't have those $ there. But if we look at this section of our formula, the table array, which is the second argument of the function, it has $ listed on A2 and E206 of the reference file. What this means is first, reference file refers to this tab, one to the left, on our worksheet. If I were to click on it, I'm just going to copy this section real quick here. Reference file right here is this this worksheet. It's just one tab over and it's titled reference file. I'm going to put what we had listed right up here so we remember what it is. That's cell N2 if you're following along. And the reason being, we can easily see it. Now it's referencing currently cell A2, which is this one right here that I'm currently in. I'm going to make it yellow, to cell E2 or E602. And if you do the keystrokes Control-Shift down and Control-Shift right without letting go of Control-Shift, I'm just hitting the down and right arrow keys, you'll be able to select the full range of this data set. And what you'll find, if you look on the left-hand side of your program, is that it goes as far down as cell 602, right over here, in column Y. Now, if we use our little sliders on the right and bottom hand side, we can get back to the top of our worksheet and see that this is only referencing columns A to E. That's this A and E part here. So it goes as far down as the worksheet goes, and it starts at this top header. This is what the Vlookup program is using to determine what is being put out over here. Going back to our formula, what Vlookup does is it matches a cell referenced to a base table of data, which is this table array that we were looking at before. It then spits out whatever is in column 5 of the reference table as its result, if it's an exact match. That's what this little false section here means. So it is matching A2 on this worksheet, which is our line number, to this reference file, column A of, cell value 2, all the way to column E, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns over, which is column E. The reason it's doing that is because of this 5, and it goes as far down looking as row 602. The reason I did this is because the line number is a unique value on this reference sheet. Every line is numbered at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, yada, yada, all the way down. If I hit Control-Shift down, you can see it ends at line 600. And coincidentally, our working file over here also ends at line 600. It's an exact copy. And so when I was trying to bring up the relationships on our working file, I just did a Vlookup on that. This is where that concatenate function comes in that I made over here. Let's say that you didn't have a full line number, but what you did have was a list of first names and a list of carriers. What you could do then is you could create a new version of this line column here. I'm just going to insert a sample right over here to do this concatenate. Let's say you didn't have line numbers, but you knew you had individual, first names and that carrier. I could do concatenate first name and carrier. And now I have something somewhat unique that I can use to run that Vlookup function to get this relationship. If I then do that over here to the reference column as well, and I'm just typing this to save some time, but you could also do this using the formula wizard. See how Adams Fort Dearborn over here matches the Well, I used first name here, sorry. Let's change that. Instead of D, let's use C. Matches Adams Fort Dearborn over here. I'm just going to extend that. It may not be exactly unique right now, but if I then added something like their date of birth, we'd have a pretty unique ID that we could use instead of a line number to match these up. I'm going to go ahead and delete them. But that's what I meant by, combining functionality to get more out of Excel. Each of these formulas on their own may seem rather insignificant or like something that you might want to know as a curiosity. But when you use them together, you can get something a lot stronger than what you started with. I cover this a little bit more in this first tab over here called Formula and Syntax General Notes. These are kind of the best, most useful takeaway, in my opinion, from all of this lecture series. And what it does is it breaks down exactly what you can do with each formula using each symbol and logical operator. The logical operator section you might not really need to know unless you're getting more into direct things, like if this cell has a value, export this. That's covered by this logical function section here, and you don't really need to know that in order to really get a good grasp of what to do in Excel. But it's fairly useful. I also cover a bunch of other functions that I kind of talked about in our first webinar, but probably haven't gone over in more detail yet. And I might not have time to in this webinar either. So I'd recommend looking into each of these and sort of going over what the formula is, what its inputs are, and how it can be used in this example. All of these have sort of 4 separate areas to them. There's the function name, which is, for example, Vlookup, a description of what the function does, which is for a Vlookup, it takes data from an already created table and puts it into a new cell based on a reference value. This reference value matches to the far left column of the table array you select. In this instance, or this reference we were using, the far left column would be this line number, and the information we were exporting was the employee relationship. It gives you the exact formula inputs that you'll need, which is a lookup value, the table, the column index number, and the word false. And then this example uses actual inputs to this function, which in this case would be lookup value 1 in range C34 to E37 of this worksheet, and export column 3, false. In this case, the match for number 1 in range C34 to E37, which is C34 to E37, column 3, based on this table, was Alabama. And so the result of this example VLOOKUP is Alabama. We have our first formula question, and I'm going to go ahead and cover it now because I think it's very useful. Mary asks, can I use Concatenate to pick 5 rows of data from Excel to put into a new sheet for downloading commission data to insert in a CRM file? I think I know what you're getting at, Mary, and the answer is kind of. If you're trying to pick 5 rows of data from an Excel file and move them to a new sheet, you might want to just do a copy and paste. You could do that, or you could do a VLOOKUP. For example, let's say we wanted to move all of these 3 columns here, relationship, policy number, and type. I'm going to just hit delete there for now. And we were going to put this data from this reference file worksheet to this working file worksheet. What I would do is I would do a VLOOKUP based on this line number. Now, if you don't have a line number, what you could do is you could use that concatenate function to create a unique value based on what you had to do this VLOOKUP. In my example here, I'm going to use the concatenate function. And what I'm doing is I inserted a column B, which is this one here. And I'm going to type concatenate. Actually, to make it a little easier, I'm going to use the formula wizard to do this. I'm just going to type concatenate here, or select concatenate from the formula menu, and hit OK. For text 1, I'm going to use first and last name. For text 2, I'm going to use date of birth. And for text 3, I'm going to use carrier. So that's cells E3, I3, and Q3. Then I'm going to hit OK and extend this all the way down the functions worksheet under this example reference file. I just hit Control-Z twice to undo that. But as you can see, it created Adams, John for 13, 19, 69, and 4th year born. And just to note, all of this information is randomly generated. Any similarity to any real person or carrier or date of birth or any of that information is purely happenstance. So if you actually find someone off of this, I'm impressed. Either way, all I did was hover over the functions or the cell the function was in, the bottom corner, until my cursor changed to this plus sign. And then I double click to extend that function all the way down. I'm going to reference the same cells in this working file to create a new column B, which I've already inserted. So this time I'm going to type it, concatenate, first and last name, date of birth, and carrier. It creates the exact same function essentially, and I just double click to push that all the way down the line. Now we're going to do a Vlookup in the relationship column. The way I would do this with the wizard is by clicking More Functions and typing in my search bar up here, VLOO, and I'm hitting Go. It says rephrase your question because you can't do partial typing here. You have to type the exact name of a function you're looking for. So in this case, it would be Vlookup, and I'm going to hit Enter. That brings Vlookup to the top. I'm just going to double click to open up the function arguments menu. Now from this menu, I can use that little arrow interaction to select my newly created identifier as our first input. Now it displays down here what the lookup value is, and I'm going to try to enlarge that, but I don't think I can in this, so I'll go ahead and read it. The first input here says lookup underscore value. And down here in the second section of the function arguments, it even says lookup underscore value. This is the value to be found in the first column of the table, which refers to this table array section here, which is our input too, and can be a value, a reference, or a text string. Then I'm going to select table array and hit the little up arrow as well. I click on reference file, and then I'm going to highlight the range of our unique identifier all the way through to the data that we're trying to pull, maybe a little further. Let's go as far out as column L, just in this case. And then drag it all the way down to the bottom. Now, if you get bored like I do of dragging like that, you can hit Control-Shift down on your keyboard, and that will jump you to the end of the selection, so long as you've already clicked on this function arguments and started typing in or selecting your range. Then you can hit this little down arrow here, and it'll take you back to the function arguments screen. Next is the column index number. And what that is it tells Excel what column it's referencing in this reference file. In this instance, we're trying to export the relationship column, column F, and we're referencing column B. So that'd be 1, including column B, 2 for column C, 3 for column D, 4 for column E, and 5 for column F for the relationship. Since we're looking to export 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns over. We're going to input column index 5. And then for range lookup, we're going to input false. And we always input false here. The reason for that is because by typing false, we tell the Vlookup function that it's looking for an exact match for what we're putting in. So it wants to match exactly the text in cell B2 to exactly the text in this cell B3. Then I'm going to hit OK. And that gives us our result, our employee relationship, based off of this concatenate. So I hope that kind of answers some of your question. You do want to pay attention if you're using this method, however, to, like I said, the syntax. You're going to want to make sure that you input $ here in your table array, because otherwise that might change, and that'll give you a bad result. If I double-click down, I get all of that out. Now, if I were to, say, drag this Formula 1 to the right, I get an error. And the reason I get the error is because I didn't include a $ when I dragged that formula over on our reference cell. So let's go ahead and do that this time. Now I'm exporting the policy number here, which is one further cell over than the relationship. So I have to change this 5 to a 6. And now I have a policy number. If I do the same thing over here for type and put a 7 in instead, then I get the type. And by double-clicking, I now have my results. I'm just going to copy and paste values for these to remove the formula. And then I'm actually going to delete it all, because I think in your case, for what you're trying to ask, Mary, there might be an easier way. I'm going to delete our reference columns that we made as well. And in this case, let's say I wanted to move the relationship information, policy number, and type information from our reference file to our working file. And I've already have confirmation that all of this information is in the exact same order, in the exact same line, exactly how I want it. In that case, I would hold the Shift key over the relationship data, move over to with my arrow key, and then hold the Control key and press down. So one more time, that's click on cell E3, input Shift on your keyboard and don't let go. Then hit the right arrow key twice. Then while continuing to hold down Shift, hold down the Control key, which is just below Shift. This is left Shift, just to clarify. And then hit the down arrow. What that does is it selects the entire range of cells E3 to G602. Then I'll just hit C for copy, click where I want to paste, and hit Control V, and that just copies and pastes the data. This is how you would copy and paste data between sheets. And if you ever wanted to input a new sheet, you could do that by just clicking on the plus down here. So I hope that helped you, Mary. If it did not and you have more questions, please feel free to let me know. Now, there is one more thing that I'm going to want to do here, though, and that is first get this data copied over as well from the reference file. The way I'm going to do this is by, under Med, hitting equals Vlookup, referencing our line number again in cell A2. I'm going to make sure the $sign's there, and getting the table array. In this case, it's under our reference file. Scrolling all the way up. We're going to want to start at A2, select all of the data available, insert the $signs, and then insert our column index number. In this case, using our same method, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 for carrier. 17 is right here at med. So I'm going to type in 17, comma, false, and hit enter. And then I get the output for medical. Now I'm going to drag this all the way over and just type 18, 19, 20, and so on and so forth. If you don't want to do this to get caught up, all you need to do is do copy and paste over the range that I've selected. So it would be a copy paste. Sorry, one moment. It would just be a copy paste on these cells right here. We do have one other question that I think is useful in mentioning. What about when the columns are not next to each other? Still Control-Shift. That is a good question. And if cells are not next to each other, Control-Shift is not going to help you as much. You're just going to want to hold Shift and then move your arrow keys. What Control-Shift does is it jumps your cursor all the way from one end of a table to another, which means the columns have to be connected. If they are not connected, then what you can do is you can just hit Shift and then arrow key over as far as you need to go. Good question. But either way, if you don't want to do the Vlookup method, because everything is in the exact same order on this, you can just do Control Copy, Control Paste. But were these lines out of order, a Vlookup is what I would use. Once we have this data, I'm personally going to just copy paste value all of this table because we know it's our final data. But you don't have to do this step for what we're about to do. The last thing that I wanted to show everyone here is a really quick and easy way to display data. And this is going to be useful if you're trying to present data to clients or if you're trying to show differences in values and changes. And that's the start of something called pivot tables. Pivot tables are probably the easiest way to chart and display information in Excel. And it's really very impressive. What it does is it takes a large array of data, like this table, for example, that has, first and last names, full employee relationships, policy numbers, all of that information, and it makes it easily displayable in different formats. And just to show you real quick, I'm going to go to the Insert tab. Over here, that's one over from Home. So it's File, Home, Insert in the upper part of your menu. And then I'm going to click Pivot Table. What that does is it tells Excel to insert a pivot table, and it's going to use this range, which is what we've been referencing this whole time for Vlookups. What it is it's telling me that it wants to take the data from cell A1 all the way over to cell Z106, which is the very bottom of this table, 101, but 601. I'm bad at reading, apparently. But all the way over to cell 601 in column Z, and all that data in between, and make a table out of it, which is exactly what we want it to do. If you were trying to reference a larger range of data, say all the way out to AA, you could do that. But you can't use the shift or auto select options. You would have to backspace over that section and then type what you're trying to get it to say. In this case, Z601. I'm going to put it in a new worksheet. If you already had a worksheet created that you wanted to put this pivot table in, you could hit Existing Worksheet and use the up arrow to choose a location for it. But I think it's always pretty easy to just put it in a new worksheet. I'm going to hit OK. Now it's telling me the data source isn't relevant. And the reason for that is because I kind of messed up when I was editing this. See how it says working file twice? That can't do. And the way you correct that is just by highlighting the section of code that's wrong and backspacing over it. Instead of doing that for this part though, if you were following along and just had a messed up reference, I'd exit out of the wizard and just hit pivot table again, and it'll select the correct range. And then hit OK. As you can see, we now have a new sheet called Sheet 1 that we're in with this blue-looking section, which is going to be our pivot table. Pivot tables are constructed by interacting with fields. And what fields are filters, columns, values, and rows of the table given by the title of each of the sections of our chart. I'm going to jump over to our working file. And as we can see, we have some headers. We have line, last, first, commas in between, relationship, policy number, and type. And just to show you, if I go back to Sheet 1, click on my pivot table, and then look through these fields, we have line, last, first, last comma first, relationship, policy number, etc. All of these represent the columns that were on the chart that we were referencing earlier. As you can see, we have this med, dent, viz, life, LTD, STD section here that we also just created over here in our base working data as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a table really quick to show, based on all of our months paid, what the total profit was for smokers by carrier. To describe that a little bit better, what I want to do is I want to get the total amount of money that was made per carrier from smokers and non-smokers. Now, the information I have in here is a lot. I don't need all of this, but I can do that by arranging this data in these field sections below here. And we're going to start with rows and columns, then we're going to add filters and values. Rows and columns are the base of any table, and it's important to know what you're putting in these sections. For this one, like I said, I want to show revenue per carrier. Typically in word structure, if someone says per something or by this, they mean they want this information in the rows section. When I say by carrier, I want to know what carriers made what. So I'm going to put carrier in rows. As you can see, I have AUL, Anthem, Fort Dearborn, Medical Mutual, and Molina by carrier. Now, I also want to know information about smokers. Specifically, I wanted to see total revenue provided by carrier for tobacco and non-tobacco smokers, or non-smokers, my apologies. That tells me that I want to see tobacco information in either my columns or my rows as well. I'm going to move these into columns, and I have a tobacco user section. It's right below sex. So I'm going to put that in my column. As you can see, I have an N for non-smoker and Y for yes in this table. And now I have a tobacco user section right here. If I click on the drop-down, I can choose what information to display, yes and no. And I have carriers. If I wanted to, I could click on this drop-down and just select which ones to display, such as Anthem, MMO, and Molina only. And just by clicking on that drop-down, I could select what I want displayed. However, it gets even better. Let's say I wanted to change based on month paid as well. I could do that by putting it in the column section here, but that kind of extends this table a ways out. It inserts a month paid for each individual section of this filter, and if it's more than just yes, no, that makes the table really large. So if you have information you want to filter by, but don't want to display it there, I'd recommend using this filters section. And I'm just going to click and drag that header that I've been selecting into the filters. And I'm sorry, I didn't quite explain this well. Instead of just clicking on the checkbox for each of these, what I've been doing is I've been scrolling over the name of the column headers, clicking on them, and dragging them where I want them. So for carrier, let's just unselect that real quick. In order to put carrier under rows, I clicked on the carrier field displayed on the top, and I dragged it to the rows section. I did the same thing for tobacco user to columns, and then month paid to filters. Let's say I wanted to switch tobacco user from the column to the row and carrier from the rows to the columns. What I would do is I would move carrier over to columns just by clicking and dragging, and tobacco user to rows by clicking and dragging. And I can do the same the opposite way as well. One other thing I want to point out before we continue is that if you have multiple things you want to sort of stack, like American United Tobacco User No Yes, the top section here, like see how carriers are above tobacco users, that sort of shows the hierarchy of how you're breaking things down. So I have carrier and then tobacco user. If I flip these, it'll say tobacco user no, tobacco user yes, and display the carrier information under that, because I have tobacco user above carrier in our little rows field area up here. Now, the last thing I'm going to input is the values. And what we're going to use from our last webinar was this corrected total paid. Corrected total paid was something that we used by the round function. But if you don't have that, you can just use total paid as well. It'll work for this as well. So what we're trying to display at least will pop up. If I put corrected total paid, I now have the total values listed under this working file here, this corrected total paid column, per carrier. And I just made that by clicking and dragging field headers. This made a little table that I can display showing how much money I made off of non-tobacco users and tobacco users per carrier for this year. If I wanted to narrow it down, let's say to display only 1/1 of 2018, I would click on the drop down under month paid, select 1/1 2018, and hit OK. When I do that, I'm only seeing payments credited to 1/1 of 2018. If I wanted to show all, I could go back into the same drop-down and click all. And I'm just doing that by clicking on the drop-down next to month paid. And then I click all. If I want to see multiple months, then I can just click that little check mark in the box, select multiple months. And then instead of displaying everyone, I can display 1, 2, and 3 for the first quarter of 2018. And now I have my sum there as well. That's sort of how you make tables with pivots, and it's incredibly easy. If I wanted to also include maybe county information under each of the rows, I could do that by dragging county information below rows. And now I have different county breakdowns as well. So I didn't have to, go through the process of adding any formulas or throwing anything together off of that. All I had was my base data, and I sort of just manipulated it to display. If you don't want to see this pivot tables field anymore, you can click off of the table and that will make it disappear. Or if you still want to edit it, click on the table and then you can hit X over here under pivot table fields. If you want to re-enable it, you'd click on the pivot table, click Analyze, and then click Field List, and that will bring it back up. But that's sort of how you make your own pivot table, and it's probably one of the most useful features in Excel that I can think of. The only other thing you might want to do with a pivot table, once you have things set up generally how you want them to view, is change how numbers are displayed first. And the way you do that is by clicking on the values settings right down here. I'm on the bottom right-hand corner of this little cross section here for the pivot table. And I just click on the drop down and hit value field settings. This brings up a menu that you can use to sort of change how these totals are being displayed. Currently, it's showing a sum of all these values. And then I can click Number Format and change this format to currency and hit OK and OK. And now my values are being displayed as currencies. So that will take the raw general value that was input and change it to look like money. The other thing that you might want to do is change the design of your table. And you can do that by just going to the design section here. After selecting your table, scrolling through, and selecting different table views. And if I click off of that, you see that blue outline disappears. And now we have a different format applied to our table. If I wish to change it, I just click on the pivot and scroll through the designs that are available. Maybe we want something that looks a little bit, bolder. I click light orange, and then I can click off of it, and I can see my data again. This is useful to generally create information. If you want to move it down then, make it look a little more professional, you could go to Insert, Pictures, and maybe add a logo from your system. I'm going to move this a little out of the way so you can't quite see where I'm going in our file system to find this. But I'm just going to go ahead and insert the logo information for Cornerstone real quick. And just move it up here to make it look a little more professional. And now we have our logo on screen as well. Then I could copy and paste this into like a Word document and print it off, or I could just print it from here by going to File, Print. And as you can see, it would print the table as is. So generally, that's all I was really hoping to cover with this webinar. If you have any other questions related to Excel, you can reach out to me at the information displayed here. That would be 513-487-5390. And my email address, once again, is tlevine@crnstone.com. Sorry for going a little bit long. I know that was probably a lot of information to absorb. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or ask them now. I'm going to be online here for a few more minutes. So if you have any questions, or if you, say, missed this webinar and want to gain access to the sheets that I've been using or that I have displayed above, then please let me know. I'm going to go ahead and, I have these saved. I'm going to see if I can get them uploaded to our website as well. And if you'd like to watch a recording of this webinar, then all you would have to do to get there at a later time is go to www.crnstone.com. Just open up your favorite web browser, type that in, go to our Resource Center, Webinar Series, and then go to Tech Tuesday. We tend to upload these recordings fairly quickly after each webinar, so this one should be available here in about a day or so. So if you'd like to follow back through and review some of the information I've displayed, please feel free. Once again, I'd also recommend studying this formula and syntax notes here because it has a few other useful functions that I didn't quite get to here in this session, and it sort of explains exactly how you would use those as well. And it also kind of explains the concept of nested functions, which was a little bit more advanced than this lesson was going to get. So if you have any questions, once again, please feel free to contact me or type them in. I'm Tom Levine, Cornerstone's technical specialist, and I hope you have learned something. Thank you, and have a great day.